Hello everybody, my name is Mervyn Stutter. I do the Pick of the Fringe show up at the Edinburgh Festival every year, and I'm continuing the interview section of that daily showcase online, and so I'm chatting with various Fringe performers over the weeks, but today something slightly different. I'm talking to a director of a major Fringe venue. His name is Anthony Alderson, the director of the Pleasance, and here he is. Hello Anthony.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And nice to see you, and very clear too. Well done technically.
But I had to, at the beginning of lockdown, I realised I had a slight sort of soft focus until I realised it was actually just the lens of the camera was filthy.
Well, you have got teenage kids, haven't you? So they're
quite good at the technology.
I was going to say, if you've got a problem, they're on hand, aren't they?
Exactly.
Now, mine's mid-20s and left home now, so I'm struggling.
Two boys who just turned, they, of course, were born in the middle of the first festival when I took over from Christopher on the 11th of August. So every summer has been their birthday during the festival. So they're 16 this year, and this is the first birthday. We've actually been able to give them a proper birthday party because we haven't been putting on a festival. I mean, I think they probably thought in the early years that the festival was just for their birthday. But
yes, we had that. Alfie was where we lived in Winchester. They have the annual hat fair there, which is an amazing buskers festival. And his birthday was always on Orams Arbour, a great field and trees. And there's major celebrations of fire eaters and tumblers. He must have also thought the same.
Exactly. Thought, God, Dad, you're amazing. All for me.
Yes.
So anyway, we had their birthday this year. They would have been working in the festival this summer. They would have joined the Young Pleasance. And see, I started at the Pleasance when I was 16. Well, officially 16. I think I might have been a little younger, but so it would have been another generation of family to be sort of involved, which would have been lovely. But next year.
I was going to say next year's a possibility. There's a number of things we need to explain for people who perhaps aren't familiar with the festival. Firstly, let's just quickly cover Pleasance. What is the Pleasance?
The Pleasance, first and foremost, it's a street.
Yes.
In Edinburgh. The Fringe started in 1947 with 8 shows that had not been invited to the international festival. 4 of them took place in the Pleasance, in that little theatre, which is an unknown fact, and there have been plays at the Pleasance for 73 years on the Fringe, in one iteration of the Pleasance or another. Called other things. It was called the Little Theatre at one time. It was called a number of different Wildcat Theatre ran it for a time. And then Christopher Richardson, who was a school teacher of mine, started the Pleasance in 1985. He'd come up, I think the year before, to see his nephew, who was at Edinburgh University, or was involved in a production on the Fringe. And someone had persuaded him that during his sabbatical from being a school teacher, perhaps he'd like to come up and run a Fringe venue.
Well, okay.
And he rather reticently did, and came and opened Pleasance 1, which is the permanent theatre, and a cabaret bar downstairs. There were 11 shows. And
what year?
That was 1985.
Okay.
My brother got a job working with Christopher that year. I was too young, and I was really rather jealous of him. And it wasn't until the following year that I was allowed to get involved. So there was a letter from I think Christopher made my father sign a letter to basically say that it was my father's fault and entirely his responsibility did anything go wrong. And I sort of got involved from then and just did every festival following. I missed a few in the middle when I got involved with Glynis Henderson and went and worked on Stomp and Ennio Marchetto. And then I hit that moment of not really wanting to do organise another 16-week tour of Stomp round Germany.
Right.
And decided that actually the Fringe is really where my heart was.
Right.
And so got in touch with Christopher and said, look, if you've got any jobs, I'm quite keen to come back. And he said, well, why don't you take over?
Oh.
Which was a bit of a surprise. Well, it was sort of a surprise. He'd asked me sometime before, and I'd said no, and I didn't feel kind of confident enough to do it. And then he asked me then, and he introduced me to some of the board. By this stage, he had turned the Pleasance into a charity. It became a charity in 1995, so 10 years after Edinburgh had started, when he built the Pleasance in London. And by this stage, the Pleasance was probably 10 venues and probably 100 shows. It had grown, each year he added, or each 2 years he added another venue, added another bit to it,
yes.
and more shows. In order to keep afloat, it was a case of, each year we're going to need a bigger boat. So you just get bigger and bigger and bigger in order to survive. And so in 2004, we did the festival together. Which was an interesting festival, because the day I arrived, which was in March, he said, well, we've got a decision to make. Do we open the Pleasance Grand? And if we do, you've got 2 weeks to program it.
Wow, okay. Now, how big is the Pleasance Grand?
The Pleasance Grand is just under 800 seats.
Oh,
so
good.
it was a sudden, and before that, the biggest venue we had was only 320, which is Pleasance One where you perform. And it was suddenly a big jump up from where we'd been.
Yeah.
And because of Stomp and working with Stomp and working around the world, I mean, we worked in, I think, 52 different countries over 6 years. I got to know a lot of promoters from around the world. So I got on the phone and just started calling people and seeing what shows there were. William Burdett Coutts, who ran the assembly rooms, said, well, why don't you take La Fura del Bal's show XXX, which was a semi sort of pornographic version of a Marquis de Sade story, which turned out to be an absolute disaster. And then we had Ennio Marchetto.
Yeah,
and
wonderful.
This show called Venezuela Viva, which I didn't think would do very well, but at 2 o'clock in the afternoon it sold out. And so we sort of made it work, and then the following year was then 2005 was then my program. It was my first one.
Right.
So yes, from there. And so this would have been year 16, year 15. I can't quite do the maths. Year 16 for me.
So it's interesting because one of the things I've known you, well, I think you did, you worked as a student on my first show in 1987.
In the original cabaret bar.
Yes, which stank of food, because the kitchens were the changing room. You draped your costumes over the warmers. I mean, it was yeah. But
it was a fireplace. You could have a log burning fire in the cabaret bar, and you could smoke while you drank your pint of beer.
It was a wonderful place, wonderful, beautiful dark woods, all the things you'd expect from an old university. Fabulous. But I've known you for a very long time, but there's a gap, which is from when you were working as a sort of crew to when you took over. And you've just hinted at it, the touring work. So did you go from, obviously you finished your studies, you must have done university, I guess. No?
I went to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, studied stage management.
Right.
And within about 3 weeks realised that I didn't want to be a stage manager.
Right.
So but what I fell in love with was carpentry. I became a scenery builder. And I left school. I left college. I went to work for a company called Phil Parsons and Steel Deck. They made Steel Deck when they weren't building scenery. He'd invented Steel Deck, in fact. And we built scenery for the National Theatre, for the Opera House. We did a couple of movies. We did some really, really fun projects, and it was a really great 2 years of working in a very big carpentry engineer shop. You learnt your trade.
Yes, it's interesting because you've got the hands-on stuff, as you're saying, the backstage work, scenery building, an understanding, a solid understanding of stage management, and then you were promoting. So this is admin and marketing. So in a sense, because it was interesting to me, that you arrived as the person who took over, but Christopher will have known that you had a very broad skill base. I think actually to run a place and to understand what it's like backstage, how you convert these halls and rooms into theatres, to have an understanding of that is vital.
For us, I think it's always been, and I've taken my lead from Christopher in many ways. I mean, one wouldn't say that Christopher was naturally, in terms of his own career. I mean, he was a teacher and a set designer.
Also key.
So, his own background was not necessarily suited to the management of a venue.
No.
But what he did know was that pragmatic, practical approach to, well, what we need to do is give people a nice space in which to perform.
Yes.
And then it's a question of having a very good eye and looking for the right work. And if you haven't got it, then go and find someone who has.
Yes.
And it's that sort of practical approach to it, I suppose. And I suppose that came from the stage management and wanting to always just make the place a better, it worked better, the rotors were better, the box office worked better. And the more you concentrate on that, the better. And don't take too many risks. Yes,
it was interesting about not taking too many risks. One thing that I learned very quickly about Christopher, which I liked a lot, probably his school teacher head was on, he liked to nurture and to bring forward, and in a sense did take some risks, but because he would spot talent and go, they need a chance, they need an opening. And the good thing, Anthony, without flattering you on camera, is that you've inherited that same skill and same energy to nurture talent, which has been evident this year through the lockdown period. Because
I think it's absolutely at the heart and soul of what the Pleasance is about. Is about that. It's a platform for ideas and talent and skills, whether they're on stage or off stage or whatever. I'm a huge believer in it, and it gives me an enormous amount of joy doing it and seeing those surprises, those people who come from nowhere, completely left field, and who suddenly make it. I mean, they and there have been numerous across the years of the Pleasance. I mean, absolutely numerous people have done that, and I think they individually respect the platform for what it is. And I mean, we've run this fundraiser over the whole summer, which ended last night, and the comments back from people who've been involved over the years have been really quite remarkable, and just really joyful, and people remembering, the first steps they took. And it's where I started, as a teenager. Christopher always had that ability to make me feel like nothing was impossible.
Yeah. So you just have
it probably was, but I still tried.
Well, funny enough, I tried to put on I did 5 years of solo shows at the Pleasance in the old cabaret bar, and then moved to the other cabaret bar, the new one. But I had this, people kept saying to me, even after 5 years, which is hardly any time at all these days on the Fringe, people, "Oh, you've been on the Fringe a long time, Merv," they'd say. Yeah, 5 years. People are clocking up their 10s and 15s now. But what's any good? What have you seen? Because I like to flyer people personally. I would, if they wanted me to, I would sit with them and sit with half a dozen people and chat. Because I felt if I could get those 6 and have a good time, you've got to trust your product, haven't you? But if they have a good time, 6 people will go away, and they will bring in people, the word of mouth thing, But they said, "Well, what's any good?" And so my wife Maura and I were thinking, well, why don't we put on a showcase of what's good? And we went out. But Chris was the only person who took it up.
Amazing, which at the time nobody else was doing it, anything like it.
No.
And now there are several of that sort of format.
Yes, but they're not as good, Anthony.
No, not as good.
No, what we do...
You're certainly the original in that regard.
Well, we're broad. We put on everything: theatre, comedy, dance, everything. So
it's really important because there is so much now on the festival. I mean, it is its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. It's open access, but it's vast, and it's getting, I think, possibly getting to the point where it's too big.
Well, we may have a natural, Mother Nature may have played a part in naturally diminishing who and what turns up next year. But talking about the length over the years phrase, what has changed over the years for you, apart from the vastness of the festival?
The vastness of it, and I think there is less. What has really changed is the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. There is an enormous amount of bureaucracy now, and that's not necessarily within the Fringe. It's coming from the council. It's coming from, the health and safety executive. It's all we take fewer risks. We're not allowed to take the risks that we used to take in terms of the rooms, the performances we put on. I mean, I remember one year. A chap, can't remember his name, but he did a production of Beowulf at the back of the Pleasance on a sort of waste ground, which involved every night building a huge bonfire. He'd pour half a gallon of petrol on it every night and set it on fire. And he would stand there with these great steel drums and play and do this extraordinary poem.
Sounds great.
And, with a great big green Mohican. And it was really powerful and exciting and whatever, and then the Doug Anthony All-Stars would obviously rock up at the end of the night with their audience and persuade half their audience to chuck their credit cards on the fire. I think Paul would try and jump over the bonfire and he'd probably fall in it. And it was, it seemed to have, there seemed to be greater risks. Performers took greater risks. It felt different in those days, but then I'm not sure the risks are any greater in many ways. I think they're probably different risks, that people are doing risk in a different way. You can't come with half an idea anymore.
Not anymore.
You have to come with a finished product. You have to be ready. If you want to, I mean, you can come with half an idea, but the chances are that very few people will come because the competition is so vast.
Well, picking up on what you just said, about, because the word anarchy crept in my head, that there was a lovely anarchic quality to the early Fringes. As you say, the Doug Anthonys would many nights transport their audience sometimes into other people's gigs. I mean, it was chaos at times, but that sort of element of that area, not necessarily the anarchy, but the chance of coming up with something not quite fully formed, is the free Fringe, which has had quite a big effect.
Yeah, I think it has. I think the free Fringe is a very natural sort of progression in many ways. If you consider what we are is the mainstream of the Fringe, I suppose it may be what we've become. I mean, I see us as a sort of microcosm of the whole thing. We are simply a collection of small rooms. Yeah. We have got a couple of biggies. And in the last few years, I'm taking on the International Conference Centre. Then we've got some very big rooms and putting some very big shows. But the majority of what we do is under 100 seats. No,
it has become...
It is still that experimental and new and inventive new work. I think the free Fringe has answered a problem that the comedy industry was facing. I'm not sure it's doing it really for theatre.
No.
Because the very nature of the way it's been set up and it's very much about, the pub. The pub earns the booze.
Yeah.
And the performers put on the show and put out a hat. I mean, in many ways, the Pleasance is not too dissimilar to the free Fringe because the pub takes the booze money. I mean, we never took the bar. So the university take the bar. We don't pay any rent to them for that bit of it. So in fact, it's the same model. It's just that we choose to set a ticket price because we want to, I mean, I love the term, the free Fringe. I mean, if someone would actually tell me in what way it's free, I would love to find out. It's not free at all.
As you talk about the ticket income, this is absolutely key to your operation, isn't it? Because Pleasance does not take any subsidy from anybody. All its income is ticket sales.
Yeah, we believe very much, and this is a real continuation of Christopher's. We believed always that the venue has to stand up on its own 2 feet. It shouldn't be reliant on the other, the public subsidy or grant money or whatever. I mean, occasionally we do get grant money, but it tends to be project-based. More we're beginning to find, the gap is getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and we are beginning to have to try and find other sources of income. But it fundamentally, I've always seen it, and it was a value that Christopher sort of instilled in me at a fairly young age, which was, this is a shared enterprise. Mm. You make the show, you pay for that bit of it, we'll build the venue. That's our share, and we'll run a box office, and it'll be a good one, and we'll give a decent front of house team, and we'll provide a crew who will help get shows in and shows out and help run the venues. And that always seemed like a reasonably good, practical deal.
Yep. The
university then chose to sell the booze. I mean, I remember Betty Brown, there was a lovely moment when finally she opened the window on the side of the Salisbury block and served a pint of beer to Hamish Darlington out the window. And he then, with Christopher help, we built a little awning over that window. And it was a 2-foot wide outside bar. And then the following year it was then a full bar, it was only a metre long, and then each year it grew, it got another metre. I mean, there was one year I think Hamish and I were still making awnings over that bar at the end of the festival, and on the last day it got blown away.
Well, going back to the lack of income, because I want to check how life unfolded through this last year, through the lockdown. When did you first suspect that things were going to go very tight? Long before the Fringe cancelled. Oh, and I must say, before you answer, Anthony, that you actually run a Pleasance London as well.
Yes.
Which is key as well. So there's Pleasance Edinburgh, which does the Fringe, and then Pleasance London, which operates all the year round. And both are connected financially and administratively. And so lockdown or COVID itself would have affected both. So there you are running London. And when did you first suspect things were going to go?
I should explain, Pleasance London, Christopher opened Pleasance London in 1995, so 10 years after the Edinburgh. And there was a very practical reason for doing it. And it was simply because he could never afford to get from one fringe to the next one.
Yeah.
He couldn't keep a team together. There was never enough money. You would earn the money from the festival, and then by November, this whopping great VAT bill would come. You'd pay that, and then you'd be skint. And then you didn't get a deposit from anybody for the next fringe until really April. So you had, December, January, February, March to kind of look after yourself. And so Christopher opened Pleasance London really with a view to, well, we could it may not make money, but it will produce a cash flow.
Yep.
That we can then use to go round the clock. And it really did make a difference. It also meant that you could keep the team together. And the same team that runs Edinburgh also runs London, with a few additional sort of full-time staff for the London operation. And so this year, I went to Karen Corrin had her 70th birthday in end of January, beginning of February. And I was having a conversation with Christian Knowles, the promoter. And I said to Christian, I'm a bit worried about this virus. It could be really bad. This could shut an awful lot of what we do down. And he said, God, I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, maybe you're right. And then on the 16th of March, obviously, when we the audience started to drift away at the beginning of March. And we could sort of see it coming. We knew that we were going to be shut at some point. And then that fateful day, 16th of March, Boris at 4:00 in the afternoon said, you shouldn't go to the theatre.
Yes.
That was it. I mean, we all just sort of threw the papers up in the air and opened the bar.
Yeah. Well, yes. So what did you do? How did you approach it? Obviously, the Fringe cancelled in early April. And so you were aware then there'd be some cancellation monies, administrative issues, which would dominate, I suspect, a good chunk of people's lives on your staff dealing
Absolutely.
with that.
We knew that was coming. And so we knew that we had to refund all the deposits and all the thing. We said, look, the best thing we can do. At that point, what we had said was, let's not cancel, let's postpone, or let's keep the door open, even a crack, just because there might be something. Who knows? This may pass by, we may get out of this before July. We can keep the programme together as long as we possibly can. And then I think there was pressure from the Scottish Government and the Council, very much on the Fringe Society and the International Festival and the Tattoo. And as soon as they announced cancellation, we sort of knew that writing was pretty much on the wall. We still, in terms of the university, we kept it open. But what we did with all the performers was say, look, it's only fair that we refund everything we've done now. We will refund all the ticket money, and we said to the audience, look, if you want to donate your ticket, you can, and that'll go to the performers, which a lot of people did. But we then knew there was, as this thing grew and lockdown really did sort of bite, you kind of go, this was never going to happen. We did have one show which we were going to try and keep going, which was Arthur Smith's walking tour of Edinburgh. And in fact, we didn't cancel that until really the last week of July, because the regulation in Scotland was still only 15 people from 5 households, even for outdoor events. And so we just... It didn't feel right. It was the right thing to do in cancelling. And it's been a very weird month. I still feel like it's April and we're just kind of waiting for it to come.
So you have to then have the worst hat on, which is the people on your staff, paying them, laying some off, furloughing some. You had all that issue to deal with.
Well, then there's the furlough, and we're a team of 20 full-time staff who run both bits, and then a casual team of, there's a lot of casuals, but they're all actors or filmmakers or producers or writers who were using the Pleasance as a way to supplement their other incomes. So they were all doing little bits and pieces. There were a couple of people who were a bit more long-term. So whilst they were on 0 hours contracts, they very much wanted to be on 0 hours contracts. Very much, as you know, our industry depends on that in some ways for people to scrape a living together while they're trying to put their art on. So I said to all of them, look, we will take the highest pay that you've earned in the last 3 months. We'll give you that for as long as we possibly can.
Wow, that's good.
And we've done that right through until the end of August. So we've kept all 45 of them on the payroll.
But you've also had a crowdfunding, haven't you? I mean, you've had a number of initiatives, because I'm having sort of mapped out what it's been like to deal with the crisis. Then the positives that you've tried to take on is the crowdfunding, there's a touring performance database, there's all the videos that people have sent in when they advertise their work to try and get a gig at the Pleasance. All those videos, you've used them as well. Run us through some of those things that you've done. The crowdfunding is...
We decided early on that one thing we had to do was carry on the showcase, if you like, which was, look, we've got these amazing shows. The industry would have come to look and see what we were putting on. I mean, there are very few regional theatres in the country who don't come to Edinburgh and buy work or find work, and plenty of theatre companies who come looking for artists or writers or producers or talent. And so we felt it was really important to maintain that aspect of what we do. Yeah. And so we put together a database with the help of it. The Arts Council gave us a small grant to do it, but we put together that database to make absolutely sure that anyone who was coming to Edinburgh, who was fit to tour, who wanted to tour possibly next spring, that that work was still getting out there and people were still seeing it. So we did that. With a company called Popcorn, there's been a writing award. They supported more than that. I mean, they read 300 plays. Wow. And they gave 4 people an award, which I think was something like 15,000 quid. They divided up for these writers to be able to say, right, we celebrate your work and we're going to do this. And I imagine some of them will get telecommissions out of it or whatever else. And so there's that's been going on. We've done a few shows in London where we gave a couple of performers the stage space to video things. So they wanted to use it to video things. We've had rehearsals for bits and pieces and really tried to keep something going. And then this fundraiser.
Yes. And the money is split. Some goes to performance and some goes to assist you guys to the Pleasance itself to recoup its losses.
The upshot for us, I mean, the turnover of the Pleasance, if you include the bar money and everything else, now we don't get the bar, but the turnover of the whole enterprise is about £8.5 million. Now, for us, that box office turnover is just over 6 million. In London, it's about 600,000. And in this year, we will be lucky if we make 100,000. So there's an enormous, now obviously the majority of that goes straight out the door in setting up the festival, and obviously over 60% of it goes mainly to the performers like yourself. But there's a little bit that's left which covers the overhead from the year before, from the organisation of getting the festival on. That's about 800,000 in overheads. And then there's the cost of the festival, which is, I mean, our budget last year was about 2.7 million to put it on. So we've got to cover that every year. Now, we didn't have the 2.7 million bit, but we did have the 800,000. And now, of course, we've got next year's to cover as well. So the loss, it's a gradual loss, but it's over time, by October. We have been prudent over the last few years. We have managed to put a little bit of money away into a reserve. So the charity had a reserve. I mean, the trustees were very careful and made me really kind of concentrate on building that, that pot for exactly this moment, when you know that you're going to face difficult times. And you kind of, you can't possibly imagine that it would all shut at once. I mean, that's what's been so brutal about this, is that it's the entire industry, and any way of earning any kind of money has been completely taken away.
Strangely, it's closed down suddenly, as you describe, but it won't open suddenly. I think things will, around the country, the arts will creep back with different energies and dynamics. And the Fringe itself, well, I don't want to be bleak, but I'm still not convinced that next year's Fringe will itself happen.
No, I'm in a similar place. I mean, there's a couple of things that I've, a friend of a friend who is a medic who has been involved in Oxford, was confidently saying that perhaps there will be a vaccine that might work for 60% of the population. Now, that's still not a lot, but it's better than what we've got now.
But it's funny enough, it reminds us of when you started, when we were chatting Ray back on this interview, you talked about people not showing up as in the audiences early part of this year as a first indication there's something going on.
Even when they bought tickets, they didn't even ask for a refund. They just didn't come.
Well, if they don't turn up in Edinburgh, it's going to be a very strange festival. And the chances are the older generation, people like myself, are going to be quite wary because they've been told, and the evidence seems to be there, that they're the most vulnerable. And a significant part of the festival is that sort of baby boomer generation. And if they don't come, or if they're wary of coming, it'll be difficult. And it only needs a second wave in February and March, and cancellation in April is likely. But
Yeah, I think there is I think that's probably the most pessimistic view of it, and we have to absolutely be careful. I mean, the health has got to be the major concern. But there is a little optimist in me as well that says,
please,
that this could be the greatest festival of them all.
Yes,
it really could be a celebration because we have learned to live with this thing, and we've learned that actually we're not as vulnerable as maybe we think we are. And maybe, if we can protect ourselves or come up with ideas that mean, the difficulty is these are small rooms, of 50 people. A social distance festival is impossible. If the 1 metre rule applies, then yes, there will not be a festival next year because, not one that we will have experienced previously. It will be there will be a festival, but it will be very, very different.
Yes, I think
usually we are inventing new ideas. People are coming up with some very exciting kind of possibilities. And in fact, we've got a platform that we are trying to develop at the moment, which hopefully will be, fingers crossed, will be finished sometime this autumn. It's another project that we've been getting on with. And I'm keen that we should have something that we should be doing.
Yes. But the online work is great. This is me doing some online work now. I've got songs up on my YouTube channel. It's not an income, but it's just a question of keeping working, keeping pushing, and trying to create. And yes, next year I do hope it happens. I think maybe the companies from abroad will be slightly less. But within this country, there's a huge amount of energy, and it would be great if it happened. We'll see. It's a month by month thing, Anthony, isn't it? Really.
It is a bit, and I think that we as an industry have got to also actually wake up to the fact that if we do want to have an income, then we've got to start finding ways that we can charge for what we do online and do it digitally. I completely understand why the National Theatre did what it did, but I'm not necessarily sure it was that helpful to the industry as a whole to kind of give away the crown jewels for free.
Yeah.
The art is the only thing we trade in. And so if you give it away for free, well, then I think you ultimately devalue it.
A lot of work doesn't work online as well. Doesn't work as well as it does live. And the thing is, we all love being in a community, sitting, watching, or being part of something. And live is the key. And it's not until it's gone, I think, that people realise they've taken it a bit for granted.
Exactly.
There's people say, I don't bother with the arts. And I'm going, do you watch television? Those actors, where do they learn their craft?
Will rush back to it. I think they will rush back to it.
Yeah.
We've got plans for London. We're working on a piece with a group called Sink the Pink, who are a drag collective. My view is that cabaret is probably the way forward.
Yes.
If I noticed the other day, there's a cafe down on the beachfront here in Portobello called the Beach House, who occasionally come and do ice creams and things in the Pleasance and so on. Now they're open. People are in the restaurant. It's laid out. The restaurant's big enough that they can get enough tables in.
Yeah, cabaret tables. It's the way forward.
But they feel very confident in that environment.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to do that in a theatre, is there anything to say that people wouldn't feel as confident? If you can get all the access to things like toilets and box office and bar, well, maybe we do table service. Maybe we do that. So that's what we're exploring. And if we have to build people into booths, well, maybe we turn them into 1950s Cadillacs and make it look like a drive-in. We've got to be inventive if we're going to make it work. Yes. And I think there's also a hybrid where you could have a digital audience watching and a live audience socially distanced in a room.
Yes.
Where you put big screens up and people can see, or it's being filmed and that's being put out there. There's got to be some inventive ways that we can do this, and I'm confident we'll find them.
I think
I also think it's going to be great fun trying.
Yes, I'm excited. I'm just come up to Portobello. We must have a beer and chat about this. But I like when you think of comedy. Comedy sometimes is difficult on a screen because actually it's the personal connection that makes a gag sometimes work better. And suddenly I could see that. Take just a comedian on the stage with a live audience in front of him and screens behind. You'll get the live reaction, which will inform the screen audience that this is a good gig and it's going well.
But I also think that the technology is going to improve so that the delay gets less. I think people are trying to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And I think we will get to a point of having a live, a semi-live, and then there's a third audience which you could stream it to. So they get the whole thing. It's almost like the schools, the dress circle, and the circle.
That's great.
We've got to find ways, and I think there will be some exciting. I was talking to someone the other day about a play that they wanted to do, and they said, well, the easiest way to do it would actually be to film it in situ in a house and do it to a digital audience, but make it a live performance, so the performers are there, living there as a unit, and then every night at 7:30 they'd perform this play. I mean, it sounds completely nuts, but it's kind of fun.
It's the next level of the domestic sitcom, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. Big Brother meets exactly that. The sort of noises off and Big Brother together.
Anthony, it's an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and I'm glad we're finishing on a very positive note. I mean, I did the bleak, but this is good, and I'm sure if it's on next year, you and I will be there. Of course, we will.
It will be back. The Fringe. The wonderful thing about the Fringe is that the spirit of it actually won't go away, and it may get smaller. It may change. The characters may change, and whatever, and they have over many years. But the Fringe itself won't get smaller. We need to change it. We've got some fundamental things that we need to address within it. There are bits of it taking too much money out and things like that, and we've got to actually lose some of the bureaucracy. But the Fringe will always exist. It's such a positive and brilliant invention, and it's a fantastic sort of continuation of the human spirit. And just like 1947, whether it's 2021 or whether it's 2022, that human spirit will exist again.
Quite right. And on that positive note, I thank you. Anthony Alderson, thank you.
Lovely to talk to you.
And to you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye. Well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. That was Anthony Alderson, the director of the Pleasance Theatre Trust. There'll be more interviews to come, so if you want any updates on what's going on this channel, why not subscribe? It's free to do so. You can do so right here. Okay, as I say, more interviews to come, so I'll see you then. Take care now. Bye.